everybody. Really, really excited to do this today. My friend Sanjeev, who supported us, and we've been to several of the classes at LiveSpeed, and we really see LiveSpeed as a huge partner with us in a lot of our success. So as we've done this 10 or 12 year journey now. By the way, that intro and bio, it's like I got to meet that guy. Who is this guy? It's really a bunch of great partners, great teammates we've had over the years to help put this all together. Really, literally hundreds of people. I don't think we're in the thousands, but certainly hundreds of people, both on the government side and on the industry side, have helped us get here. And really have a benefit. I have a benefit that many don't in the federal government or in any kind of position, is I've been here so doggone long, right? I've actually been at DHS at the old INS. I'm actually older than DHS, if you can believe that. I was at the old INS in 2002, where we started, where we were very waterfall, and we put 3 releases out a year. So really, every 4 months wasn't too bad for a waterfall project. But and then I've kind of come along since then, and I came to headquarters in 2013, and to do specifically Agile and to streamline our system development lifecycle. And so it's been a wonderful journey. So since 2013, really, when I came to headquarters for the express purpose of doing this, till today, we've had a lot of success. I'm going to be giving you like a unique view of Agile. From my perspective, I'm not at the team level. I don't do, I'm not the guy that asks about t-shirt sizing, although I know what it means and all the cool things that you do day to day to actually put product out, with your self-organized teams and your scaled teams and all the good things you do day to day to put out product. I'm here to talk about actually pushing Agile forward at the agency level. It's taken quite a few things to get this done here at DHS. We've been pretty successful, but again, it's been a solid 10 years to get us where we are. And in talking with Sanjeev in advance of this, probably a month or two ago, talking about coming on, he wanted to offer this unique perspective to the Agile community and the meetup community that we sometimes don't get a chance to hear, maybe never get a chance to hear, right? So a couple things, a couple other things about that is, not only am I talking sort of at the enterprise level and how you push Agile down or encourage Agile, I should better say, but also within the federal government, which itself has so many weird rules and regulations that you have to adhere to. So the interesting thing at DHS is we really don't do pure Agile, right? We don't do pure DevOps. We don't do pure scaling. Everything we do is within the context of the wider acquisition lifecycle framework that we have to adhere to by law and by policy. And so we're sort of doing Agile within this larger framework, and it's been very interesting, and lots of lessons learned, lots of feedback loops, right, to get us to where we are today, and it's been a long journey. So I sort of plan to talk about the journey, some of the things we've encountered as we went along, some of the things we're doing today, and we're not there yet, right? And you never are, right? With software, with anything else. So we're moving towards the future with a lot of really interesting things going on. So to get started, when I did come up to headquarters in 2013, I'd been working at ICE as the systems assurance lead there. So we had a very prescriptive process that we followed, just starting to take baby steps into Agile. But one of the early things we tried there, which was an anti-pattern, as Bob Payne may say, is that we attempted to take our current SDLC gates, the waterfall gates, right? Planning, requirements gathering, design, and all that stuff. And we tried to figure out which Agile ceremonies sort of fit those, and tried to shoehorn, our existing waterfall stuff into an Agile mindset. And of course, we failed. I won't say we failed miserably, but just let's say it wasn't the way to go, right? Ultimately. And so we attempted that at first. That's when I was at ICE, and we finally gave that up pretty quickly when we came to headquarters. But we came to find out that look, if you're going to be agile, go be agile, right? So when I first got here, there was really nobody doing agile, at headquarters. Some of the components were ahead of us, and that's not unusual. The way it works at DHS or other federated agencies is that you have a central headquarters component. That's me and my team and all my peers to do different things. And then you have a number of subcomponents. In our case, they call them components. Like you have your USCIS, you have your ICE, you have your TSA, FEMA, and those larger components that they themselves manage the vast majority of their IT development or any other activities they do to meet their respective missions. But they each have a chief information officer who more likely than not, in most cases, is the person that manages Agile and software development. And they each have their chief acquisition executive who sort of manages the tools down there. But they're at DHS, or it's mandated by law that over a major acquisition, right, where you're level one, which is $1 billion life cycle or more, or level two, which is $300 million life cycle costs or more, they have to come to headquarters. And so when we got started, that was the first thing we did, is we validated for those major acquisitions, which have to come to my team and other teams that partner with us for oversight to validate that they're ready to go into the development, into the future, right, and actually meet the investment. Those are the folks we concentrated on first. So, and each, like USCIS, for instance, right? Mark Schwartz is who here has heard of Mark Schwartz, seen the TED Talks? He's fabulous. He was the chief information officer at United States Citizenship and Immigration Services back in the day. Really, our first Silicon Valley CIO within the DHS. And oh my gosh, did he want to move fast, right? He was like, we were kind of a sleepy waterfall-based organization all the way across. And Mark was like, we're going to go agile. We're going now, right? And so since then, we've used USCIS as our North Star. So they're typically ahead of us, and the rest of DHS, that is, in many ways. And they got some great things done. Mark is, of course, he's now with Amazon Web Services. He's written a bunch of books. I love reading them because it's like, I remember that. I remember when that happened, because Mark came in and he fight a lot of bureaucracy, both internally and also externally, right? So the government accountability officer, who we have to, what they do is they come through and they work for Congress, right? So what happens is if there's a law or policy passed that a major, DHS or a major government agency has to follow, GAO is going to come look, and Congress is going to have oversight committees. They're going to send GAO to see, okay, these guys are supposed to be doing this thing. Are they doing it right? So one of the first things they did is came knocking on a 2012 OMB, Office of Management and Budget policy called modular acquisition, right? That's back when they didn't know what they wanted to quite call Agile. They called it modular development then. And what it was saying at the time is like, if you're developing IT, you have to deliver IT in a minimum of 6-month increments of usable functionality, right? So of course, that's, for many of us, laughable these days. That's quite way too wide, right? But at the time, it was radical. Holy cow, you want me to put a release out within 6 months? And of course, people are thinking the waterfall method, and how are they going to get that all done? So anyway, so some of the early Government Accountability Office meetings with Mark Schwartz, where they were asking him questions, because they were really, it was very serious, don't get me wrong, but they were pretty comical, because it was really the clash of two different ideas, right? The way, GAO is, the way they do it is, the policy says this, you have to do that exactly. Or if you say something, you say you're going to do a certain thing, then I'm going to come back and check you in a year or two. And if you haven't done that exact thing, then you haven't really met what you said you were going to do. Well, of course, as we all know, Agile is all about learning, right? It's all about, hey, we tried it. that sucked. I'm going to do this other thing because we tried that and that did not work, right? So Mark Schwartz trying to convince GAO that that's how we were working, and them having the frustration of saying, wait, you said you were going to do X and you ended up doing Y or then even Z. Then what are you talking about? We can't measure that, right? So that was sort of a challenge that we had early on, which was a lot of fun. So just one of the other things that we had to deal with. By the way, if you ever see any of Mark's TED Talks, he's going to talk about the SDLC folks or the SELC folks, the System Engineering Lifecycle is what we call it here at DHS. So it's like a love note to me. So I was one of the guys that early on, I was a little more of an incrementalist, right? And trying to convert us from Waterfall to Agile. He really wanted to go right now, right? So between the two of us, we finally got it settled, right? But it took a solid year before we could get our SDLC in place one year, because he was a holdout. It was like the way we work here. Each CIO at DHS can put a hold on a policy going forward or a governance going forward if they disagree with it. And then you have to get together and kind of work it out. So it's sort of like Congress does sometimes when there's somebody they don't want to go forward, they'll put a hold on that person, right? So, but Mark just wanted us to be more agile. And as a result, we're way more agile. We got way more agile, way faster than we would have done otherwise. But if you ever see one of his TED Talks and you hear the conversations with the SELC guys that he talks about, just think of me, because that's a little love note to some of our early conversations. But going back to when we got started, this is some of the environment we lived in. We were Waterfall. Nobody knew what we were talking about. And one of the things we learned early on that was very interesting is, you could go, we had a bunch of grizzled old IT program managers that have been doing this forever, right? They knew how to do it. They knew how to do their cost, schedule, performance, budgeting. Everything was built, though, on the waterfall model, right? Everything was built on a X amount of time to figure out, your planning of the overall effort, X amount of time to figure out all your requirements. Of course, you don't know all your requirements. It was never any more than a swag, right? But you write all these requirements, 4,000, 5,000 of them, that individual requirements, and only then do you start your design work, right? Which is it's laughable. Many of you may have never even experienced this sort of environment. But then you do your design work, preliminary design, final design, or we called critical design back then, which was, give it that extra air of sinister seriousness. And then you finally, once you get done with your design, then and only then do you start building, right? And so the entire design's built, all the interfaces, everything's designed out, and then you start building it. And then when you get it all built, then you test it, right? And then you hand it off to the testers, and that takes several more months. And then finally, when the testers get done testing it, this looks great. Hey, you know what? Let's pull the users in. So you fly the users in from all over the country. You buy them coffee and donuts, and you sit them down at the screen. And invariably, the first thing is like, well, what's this button doing here? I want it up there, right? So immediately, if it's a release 10.0, you're immediately doing release 10.1, just based on the fact that for some reason we always thought it'd be a good idea to you do user acceptance testing after we tested the whole thing completely. And so then you have, you get your final version out, and then and only then do you put it out to production, all in one fell swoop, which you're invariably missed something, because no two test environments were ever alike, right? No environment in testing could ever be approximate what was in the real world, because you just couldn't build it to scale. Of course, now we just segment off pieces of the cloud, and we test in one place, and we develop in one place, and we deliver to the next place. And so we know all the patches and all the security and everything's the same, but I'm talking about the bad old days. So that's the way we used to do it. So that's what folks were used to when we first started. So when immediately Agile came in and folks started going to conferences, and it was like I was going to a conference in Beijing, right? It was like a completely different language. Nobody knew what these Agile guys and gals were talking about. And I get why they did it, right? There's a whole new the whole new language for a clean break. This is my assessment of it anyway. Scholars of Agile like Bob and others can tell me differently, but it seemed to me they wanted a clean break from the past of that old waterfall methodology that we used. And so it required new languages, right? And sort of a new set of terms. And so, but the challenge was, for, at least initially, for the old guys and gals, like, what the hell are these guys talking about? We didn't even get it. And so I did find that, I was a little bit of an incrementalist. I found it a bridge too far, right? Because people I've had some meetings where, I'd had a bunch of really law enforcement people sitting around the desk, and they were had a lot of experience doing waterfall management, and then an agile coach in the meeting. Okay, guys, well, here's what we're going to do. We're going to put a pretty sailing ship on the whiteboard, and everybody's going to write down their, what they want this thing to do on the sticky notes that I'm giving you, and then we're going to put the sticky notes up on the sails. We're going to create the sails of this pretty sailing ship, and by the time we get all the sails up on the sailing ship, we're going to know what we want to do. And these law enforcement officers look at me like, what the hell are we doing here? It was just a little disconnect between the ways of seeing the work, right? But what we did early on with DHS for that was we created what we call the Agile building blocks, right? So it was basically, we knew there were key Agile concepts we needed to train everybody on and get people familiar with across DHS. But it needed to be simple. It needed to be something that lay IT persons could understand, people who had no understanding of Agile, right? So the Agile building blocks were like very, very simple concepts that they became granular as we explained them more, but people could understand. So one was like, hey, get your product owner involved, right? Because back in the day, the product owner's like, yeah, man, here's what I want. You would sit there and they would read these copious requirements. They would sign off on the requirements and say, see you in a year, man, come back and, show me my product. And they'd go off and do all that waterfall stuff and come back in about a year, or maybe not quite that long. And then you'd show the product owner what you'd built, and they're like, dude, where's my stuff? That's not what we talked about. First, they'd seen the wireframes, they'd seen all the diagrams, they'd seen all that stuff. But as we all know, right, you don't really know unless you're right there doing it and building it and getting the feedback loops, right? So, but that we had to fix the product owner problem, because these guys didn't want to hear about it. They're like, hey, I got a day job, man. I'm going to tell you what I want. Go build it, come back and tell me. So we had to solve that. That was one of the building blocks. Get your product owner involved. Another building block, for instance, well, I won't go through all of them. Another one was like, get your requirements out of a book and into a tool. So these folks had formerly, written up all these sorts of requirements documents, and with all these thousands of requirements and requirements traceability matrices on Excel files that you would go through and click off and test. And, you would build them all in advance of even writing the first line of code, right? Obviously, that's an anti-pattern. So we're like, okay, Jira, Lean Kit, whatever you use. We do use Jira here at headquarters. We have the Atlassian suite. But get them out of there, get them in a tool where we can actually work on those and we can actually do our planning. And so that was one of them. And there's several more. Obviously, eventually, and two of the last ones were DevOps and scaling, right? So DevOps, we wanted to get there eventually, which we are doing now. And in scaling, we wanted to scale. So we sort of wrote and some of the other ones were get your contracts in order. So that was something we really had to do as well. Get everything in alignment, as you test, do test-driven development. For instance, don't wait until the end to test. And so what we told them early on, one of the building blocks I could do is at least sit your tester down with your developer side by side. And we can, and so we sort of got there incrementally like that. So based on these 10 building blocks, we eventually made it more granular, but that became a maturity matrix that we used across DHS. And then we went out and assessed everybody in the enterprise where they were according to these 10 building blocks at the time, which is kind of a rudimentary maturity model. Obviously, there's some beautiful ones now, but this was pretty rudimentary at the time. And we found out what we pretty much thought. We knew that nobody was doing DevOps then, not even CIS then. They were just taking the first steps. And nobody was really doing scaling. A couple people did a few of the other things. But by setting up those 10 building blocks, not only were we able to train folks on and tell folks what they should do, but we were able to actually start measuring, using it as a very rudimentary way of measuring our completion. Like there were 10 of them, so we didn't really worry about how each one was, like the weight of each one. We just said, hey, if you're doing 7 of these things, you're 70% there, right? If you're doing 5 of them, you're 50% there. So that gave us an opportunity to measure each team, measure each program, measure each component, and then measure the overall DHS. So we sort of tracked along that for quite a while. So that was pretty effective. And that's actually, when we talk about the 100% completion rate of developed software for major programs, that was in December 2017, that's what we measured it against. So self-reported, now we don't have the bandwidth to go check every last program, but based on the parameters we gave them, everybody was reporting, yep, we are developing at least in an agile manner. And that was, about 5 years ago, 6 now. But then the next thing is, how do we, we're starting measuring value and things like that. But it was pretty interesting as we went forward with that. A lot of outreach, a lot of training. Some of the common, the best practices we said is like, get everybody trained all at the same time, which I know that we've had some really exciting opportunities to go to Livespeed, for instance, on occasion, and go to the product owner training, which was fun. Bring everybody at the same time so they all understand that. And everybody's hearing the same thing at the same time. So it took quite a long time for us to get there. But as we went forward, then we're kind of moving into the DevOps realm now. So we sort of got Agile solved from a development perspective, but we're now heading towards DevOps, and that's a new chapter.
First question is, where do you see Agile going in the next 1 to 2 years at DHS?
Well, thank you. So Agile for the next couple of years, we're really working DevOps, and we call it Secure DevOps at DHS. Because we want to build security in, not bolt it on. And like, who's ever back in the old days when it was always like just before you went ready to go to production, the security folks raise their hands, say, "Wait a minute, can't go because there's XYZ vulnerability." Well, we want security to be with us every step of the way, and that's common in DevSecOps, which is probably the more common term. But SecDevOps is where we want to place the emphasis here at DHS. And so we do partner with them on every stage along the way and plan for it. So we're not trying to tack it on at the end. SecDevOps is the big thing we're doing right now. And we want to, we've made a goal, like when we did Agile, what we actually did is wrote it into policy. I wrote this policy in 2014. I wrote in policy in 2014. It said you have to use Agile if you're building software, if you're developing software. It took 2 years to get it approved, so it was 2016 before that kicked off. We may go that way for DevOps. The CIO said nothing less than, I want DevOps to be the standard way we deliver IT capability at DHS. So we're moving towards that. We've built our own CI/CD pipeline here at headquarters. Many of the components have one already. If you think the big ones like USCIS, ICE, those two are very, very forward thinking, and they've got their own pipelines, and they're churning stuff out. CIS many times, I think a day in some cases. But you think about DHS has 23 components. There's a big 8 of the major ones that you've all heard about. There's another 15 that are much smaller offices. Those folks, the big 8, they got their own budgets. They're good to go. The smaller offices depend on headquarters. And so we finally build our own CI/CD pipeline, and we're starting to get people up on it, starting to increase their maturity and add them to that so that they can start doing DevOps. At some point in the future, I do see us mandating DevOps, right, as appropriate. I mean, not everything qualifies for being DevOps. Obviously, if you're buying hardware, that's not really appropriate, but unless it's part of the solution. Some things go to the cloud, some things don't. As a few things here at DHS is a little too sensitive to put in the public cloud. But yeah, ultimately DevOps and the cloud are where we're going, and Agile. I mean, really, I mention those two things because at DHS, it's all part of Agile, right? Our entire Agile journey has been wrapped up. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, even DevOps and scaling, all of that's been wrapped into Agile, into our entirety of our Agile journey. A lot of people see DevOps and Agile as different, and they frankly are in a lot of ways. But we see it as our overall agility and getting basically meeting the mission faster and getting it out there. So in the next couple of years, that's really where we're going, right? We're going to be streamlining the way we do Agile. There's a lot of new thoughts out there about Agile. You read LinkedIn every day. Some of the great, thinkers out there, Jimmy Butler and others, who's like, why are we calling it that? Why are we doing, by the book Agile is sort of out the window now. I mean, it's really great to learn it like any other thing. You do the basics until you get it well, then you start figuring out where you can streamline it. I think that's where we are, and we've been doing long enough to be able to sort of do that. So streamlining Agile, we're also going to be changing our metrics to make sure we're to measure the value of what we're putting out a little bit more. Right now, our metrics have basically been more towards, are you doing Agile at all? And then and the GIO who came visited us a couple of years ago, we finally just signed off on a large audit we've done for a couple of years, where we were able to prove to them that we have the capacity to measure that we were getting better and better at Agile. And now the thing is, what's the value of Agile at the end of the day? What's the value this is bringing us, and being able to capture the metrics and analytics to show that value. And anyway, that's the next 2 years, and it'll probably take a little longer than that, but that's where we're heading. Thank you for that question.
All right. The next question, have you figured out how to crack budgeting for the DHS to align more with an Agile way of working?
No. Yes, it's not actually a DHS thing, but it's a great question, because this is one of our big challenges, right? So, and this is where I talked earlier about doing Agile within the federal ecosystem. So we're still on a 2-year budget cycle. I literally wrote a document the other day asking for funding. I built a brand new branch, which I'm excited about, for emerging technologies. So AI, RPA, natural language processing, low code solutions, that kind of cool stuff. So everything we do, I want to do in an automated way as possible. But for that brand new branch that I've got a few folks stood up already, I just submitted my funding request for the 2025 budget year, because there's a 2-year delay for federal budgets. You submit it all up and it goes up to Congress and it gets considered and it comes back down. There's a giant progress called PBB&E that people way smarter than me in those areas follow. But it's really a challenge, right? The big challenge in the federal government for most of the big agencies is that we don't have discretionary funding. Everything we spend has to be tied to a program, and it has to go up individually and then come back and be authorized individually, right, for us to spend money on it. The challenge is so that it makes it really difficult. It would be great to have a big pot of money, discretionary fund, where the component, or even we at headquarters say, wow, we really need to invest in this one thing. We got to hit it hard and get that ready, because that's going to set us up for success. But we don't have the flexibility to make those sort of real-time investment opportunities like the industry might, right? So we have to plan for it, budget it, roll it up to the budget, get it back a couple of years later, and hopefully get it back, right? And then make some adjustments. And in the modern era, there's a new thing out there that you might want to do. So the art of it is trying to write the program specific enough to get the funding to show what you're trying to do, what business gap you're trying to meet and fill. But not write it too narrow to when you finally get the money, then you are locked into a solution. And of course, this is just at the macro level. A lot of the things we're talking about at IT development level, right? So that is a challenge. So the answer is no. Ultimately, we want to get discretionary funding. It's going to take laws to change. It's going to take policies to change, and that's going to be a longer term goal that we're just going to have to keep working on it as a community. It's well understood. I was at TED Talks or they called it Fed Talks. Back about 5 years ago, where the OPM head was there talking, and she was talking about this, needing that, and it hasn't moved forward since. But so there's the budgeting piece. Also, one of our agile building blocks is we work with our contracting folks. Now they do have it together. We've got a procurement innovation lab here at DHS. Polly Hall and a guy named Eric Cho set that up. Eric is now over at FDIC, I think, but he was actually on the Hill when they wrote the FATARA law, and he came here and to DHS and helped to do contracting for Agile. That's what he ended up doing when he got here. When I first was briefing my contracting peers on Agile, they weren't even my peers, they were my boss's peers at the time. They were like, what are you guys talking about? They did not get what we were talking about. It took a lot of training. But then Eric came down, and I was really worried about meeting that one Agile building block, because contracting is obviously it's got to be big. And Mark Schwartz and others at USCS has sort of had some good ideas about it. But then when Eric came down, he was working it from the inside, and took a year, and they were right there with us. And contracting was the least of our worries anymore. And they're still we still partner with the Procurement Innovation Lab today, and they do great work. So, but that's, a little bit about the money aspect of alignment with Agile. I hope that answered the question. I'm taking you guys on a 10-year history trip on all these questions. So.
And how do you recommend teams deal with product owners who aren't engaged? Often I see proxy POs, which are another anti-pattern.
Yeah. There's a couple of stories about this. I mentioned this early on. It was definitely a challenge there. People just did not want to do it. And they came around. I also saw the other side. So the answer is, I don't know what the answer is actually on that. Is this a continued training all together? If you can get them involved and just helping them understand it. And some people are just recalcitrant, and it's going to be a challenge. And, we still have humans, you write laws and you write guidelines, but humans still have to follow them, right? But one of the other things that we saw that was kind of at the other end of the spectrum on this aspect is that the programs that I deal with are often quite large. And, I mentioned those millions and billions of dollars of lifetime investment costs, but really in the modern era, that's pretty goofy, right? But you do that because you got to get the money do that to your budget cycle, right? But otherwise, when Mark Schwartz showed up, he's like, how much this thing cost? Is ridiculous. In the era of needing logisticians and people in planning for 30 years out, it's just an old anti-pattern. We're not out of the woods on that yet, though. But anyway, one of the things that we had, I said all that to talk about these major large systems we work on. At one point, some folks were too agile in a way, in that it was all about, what's one of the key things? Make your product owner happy, right? Well, some of the product owners were product owners of a segment of a much larger system, right? So the product owners had some really great agile teams, and they kept churning out code, and man, the interface looked amazing. The product owner loved it. And he says, man, this is awesome. This is fantastic. Exactly what I want. Well, it was gorgeous, but it wasn't connected to anything, right? You didn't have like the high level product owner. This should have been, which is sort of a safe concept, I think, a higher level product owner with a series or like a set of various product owners that report to that person, where they respectively own their piece of the system, but someone still has to do the integration, right? So what they made a really beautiful like boat anchor, because it was gorgeous. It just wasn't connected to any back-end databases or anything. It just, as an overall system, and this is all has to be systems thinking, right? It didn't meet the mission because it was just one piece of this overall mission, which, could not be used because the rest of the program or the rest of the system was not connected to it. So that's, seemingly one of the, if you go pure agile, you say, yeah, product owner's happy, product owner happy, making it, going through my retros, they're digging it. But at the end of the day, you built something that looked really great. It wasn't usable for some period of time. And boy, the data folks on that project were like desperate to talk to me and to have me talk to, their product owner. And I think that's that worked out. I'm a huge fan of coaches. You got to get coaches in there to tell people what's going on, but you can lead a horse to water, as they say. That's a great question. It's a challenge we've had, and I wish I had an easy answer for you on that, but I don't.
Recommendations for a Scrum Master Agile delivery lead trying to break into the federal realm. The process has become sort of long. So any recommendation?
Yeah. Oh my goodness. You're talking about my pain points, all my pain points today. So one of the things that we're actually working on with my emerging tech group is trying to help streamline this federal hiring process because it is suboptimal at best. I'm being so generous when I say that. I mean, I had a couple people that openings in my and I'm finally full. I had two openings open for like an entire year or maybe 2 years. One opening went for 2 years. And I mean, how do you do business like that, right? And it's just that the onboarding system, the way that they look at resumes, compare resumes to the openings. There's a bunch of really, I mean, the rules were written for a reason then, but they're just, I feel like sometimes they're letting the tools, run the people instead of vice versa, and letting people just use them as tools. It is, in my mind, I'm not thinking of a single official federal job classification is that actually for a Scrum Master or sort of a coach. It would have to be something like an IT specialist, and then you would go in with a specialty. So sort of the way we do it here in the federal government is we'll go in for like a generic IT specialist, which has a number of things that one is supposed to do, and then there's special categories of qualifications that we want folks to do, and that's where you really want to look for it. So I would actually, so USA Jobs is a really great site. I would go in there and I would put just put search terms. You can put search terms into it, and they'll send you any resumes that sort of match that stuff. But the thing is that one of the things that's really I found challenging, and again, as I rail against the system in my last few years here in the federal government, I was, there's a number of things that you have to qualify to do. There's some tests they actually administer, right? You have to qualify for this generic IT specialist stuff before you can get to your specialty, right? And they won't tell you, OPM manages that, by the way. They won't tell you what is on those tests because they don't want anybody playing them. They don't want the hiring managers coaching people. They don't want people to pre-plan too much. They want you to have a good general knowledge. Well, if I'm looking for a Scrum Master, I don't care if you can do the patching on a computer, right? On a server. I really don't care if you pick it. One of a million things one might need to do as a generic IT specialist. I have a very specific use case for you, but that's sort of not how it works. You have to kind of answer the generalist stuff, and then only then do you get to zoom in on the real thing that the hiring manager wants and that that you qualify for, right? So it's a challenge. I would go to USA Jobs. I mean, that is the place. There's that's the place to go. There is a new system we've just put in at DHS. It's called CTMS, Cyber Talent Management System. It is pretty locked in for cyber talent. We're trying to, obviously those guys and gals these days making a ton of money in industry, and it's tough to get them into the federal government. But this job tool allows us a wider range of salaries, but you have to take tests for it. But I mentioned that though, so you have to qualify to use it. You have to show some knowledge of cyber. But I mention that because there is a paragraph in there which has a little bit more openness, and it's not specific to cyber. And I'm looking to try to exploit that a bit to see if we can get some really smart folks into the government to do various IT things that are not specific to cyber. But as I mentioned earlier with Secure DevOps, security is at the forefront of everything we do. So try to do some massaging there, but there's sort of two opportunities. So and we're the only persons that have that CTMS. That's a DHS program. But yeah, it's the other thing I would tell you is, man, you be ready to wait a while when you put your thing in. It takes quite a long time to get things filled. But the one thing I'll make this pitch for the folks in the audience here with regard to coming to work for the federal government. It takes a while to get in, but I love the work. I love the mission. It gives you direct control over what you want to do. I was a contractor for a long time. I'll probably be a contractor again before I hang up my spurs. So then you're supporting a product owner, if you will, in the government, and they make all the decisions and you just sort of support them. So it's really great to be able to point the ship exactly where you want it to go. And the other thing I'll say with regard to age, right? I'm an older gentleman. I'm 64, 65 in September. The interesting thing in the federal government IT space is 30% of the folks in federal government IT are 60 and above. Within the next 5 years, they're going to be qualified to leave. They may not leave, but they're going to be qualified to. That's a radical cliff, especially when you consider that the number of folks under 30 in federal IT is considerably less than that. And there's going to be some period of time where it seems to me no federal contractor in this town that does IT will ever be out of work, because that work has to be done. But what it also tells me is if you're a young person or a middle-aged person and you want to get into the federal government, you're going to be able to do what you want. You're going to be able to own this thing, run this thing, make it happen, because all the dinosaurs are moving out. So what I would recommend is, I love working for the federal government. It's one of the greatest decisions I ever made. I would come in now. It might take a while to get in, but come in now. Number one, to get it started. Number two, to get whatever knowledge we oldsters have before we get out the door, right? And then make it yours. I think it's really, really exciting. And I do think some of the things we do, like Agile, Waterfall to Agile to DevOps, and many other areas of our lives, right? I think you just have to let folks retire out. Some people are never going to change. So, bring the fresh thinking, come and, we're sort of getting there, but come, make the thing yours. That's what I would say anyway. That's my pitch for federal government employment. Come on, guys.
How do you rate Agile adoption progress in the big 8 versus little 15, and your thoughts on that?
Oh, yeah. So folks like CIS and ICE, those are our North Stars, right? So we do manage all of them. And we measure all of we do manage at a certain investment level. They're great. USCIS is world-class Agile, right? World-class DevOps. Perhaps not, from the very, very top to the very, very bottom, but they do it right. They do team managed deployment where everybody gets together and says, "Yeah, is this ready? Is this pipeline good?" What we do now is like, in the old days, we had to sign off on every release that went to production between the PM, the business owner, and the lead technical authority. Now you sign off on the pipeline. Yep, pipeline looks solid. Let's start churning out stuff. So even at headquarters, even ourselves, my peers in our development division, we're doing 2 releases a month with Agile, which blew my mind last year when I figured that out, because we really were doing an intro inspection on our own work at headquarters, and we're doing pretty well there. So and the smaller offices, not as well, right? They are not as, number one, they don't have as many programs, they don't have as many people, they don't have the expertise, they don't have the staffing, they don't have the budget, and they are going to depend on us heavily. So really, to answer the question for them is, how fast can I get my stuff good and my peers, at headquarters, because they're going to be the ones leveraging our CI/CD pipeline, for instance, where CIS is like, yeah, that's nice. You guys do your thing. You guys are good, but they're already far in advance of us. But one of my big jobs, it's a fun job, but is I steal from the rich and give to the poor, right? So CIS and ICE, they may have Maseratis, and some of our smaller offices, may have Ford Pintos. My job is to try to get everybody into a nice Honda Accord or something, maybe a Tesla, but everybody have a really solid, usable, workable way of doing this going forward. And then for us all to iterate going forward. One thing my boss would kill me if I didn't mention this is we are instituting a black belt program here at headquarters where, and we're doing an Agile DevOps across many different IT disciplines. But, what is a white belt? What's your foundational level of understanding? What's a yellow belt, green belt? brown belt. I'll be working with that directly. When we get a black belt like Grandmaster, I want one at headquarters, one at each component, and that person then can go create their own qualification standards and help people come along. Really, really excited about that. That is my new number one job, as my boss tells me, and I'm looking forward to